So, welcome to the webinar of the VMBN. My name is Barbara Doeleman van Veldhoven, and I'm one of the members of the board of the VMBN. And I'm very happy to welcome us all. So, as I just said, we really appreciate if you open up your camera during the webinar, so we have a sense with who we share the virtual space today, and so that we can create a space of connecting and open dialogues together. And you can choose for gallery view or speaker view, probably you already know, in Zoom at the right top part of your screen. So there are some, you see there view or speaker, and you can choose whatever you like. And today it's a real privilege to welcome Mark Leonard as keynote speaker for this webinar. Mark has searched for a means to make meditation accessible since about 20 years. He played a key role in establishing the Oxford Mindfulness Center, opened in 2008, and then adapted mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for the workplace. The result of a series of innovations, Mark represents a new approach to fostering social leadership and systemic change. The prevailing narrative tells us that society provides the opportunity to improve our lot of developing skills that we sell for fair return in the marketplace. While we have succeeded in satisfying our material needs, many of us live unhappy, lonely lives. And from Mark, his point of view, mindfulness as a self-help or therapy is effective at managing the stress of modern living, but this does not go to the root of the problem. Social mindfulness is a new approach that applies mindfulness to understand the social causes of stress and empower change. It combines mindfulness with a sense of relatedness to break the illusion of the separate self. And today, Mark Leonard will challenge us to explore anew, what is mindfulness for? The webinar will be a mix of plenary talks, discussions in breakout rooms, and Q&As. Mark asked me to facilitate the webinar and dialogues, and I'll do the best I can, although I'm obviously not a native speaker, so please have patience with me on that. So, Mark, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, and it's a real pleasure to be here. So, and lovely to speak with you again, Barbara, and meet all of your friends and colleagues in Holland. It's really exciting. So I'm just going to, I'll just let you know, and thank you for that introduction. It's much easier not to have to talk too much about myself, although I probably can do that and get into dig myself into a hole. So it's good not for me not to do that. So thank you, Barbara, to excuse me from that. Perhaps I should just say, though, that my background originally was in environmental sciences and the management of natural resources, particularly fisheries and waste management. So I was always looking for something that would help us really deal with the critical issues of resources and how to, and in the end, protect the natural environment and life on this planet, because like many of us, we've been very concerned for quite a while about the future of life on this planet, because we are consuming so much and destroying the living planet itself. So to start with, I came from this place of looking for this means to bring meditation into a wider audience based on an understanding of it primarily from Buddhist practices, and was frustrated for a long time trying to work, trying to build community in a Tibetan Buddhist center in Oxford, and meeting other Buddhists and finding that everything was really so inward looking and isolated from society. And eventually I got this wonderful opportunity to help set up the Oxford Mindfulness Center. And it was really exciting because it was taking a secular form of meditation into the public sphere, into the health service, based on biological based understandings in cognitive therapy and behaviorism that come from a biological background, into the public, into the popular environment. So, and it had to create something that was very contained and disciplined, that would be repeatable in a therapeutic context, to make it possible to test it, and then could be presented to the National Health Service as an intervention, like a drug that had gone through similar trials and could have similar predictable outcomes, that could be presented to a panel to examine its value, just like a drug, to make sure that it had the sufficient, it was cost effective in terms of public money to reduce depression. And that's really why it needed to be so tightly structured and reproduced to maintain its provenance as a therapeutic intervention in a clinical context. But I was looking for something. I was not a clinician, and I was really looking for something that I could apply as social change. So I needed to find a way of applying this in a different context. And as the obvious place was the context of the workplace, partly because this would also potentially give me an income to survive as I could teach it in the workplace. And in this context, you can't, the format of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy just didn't work for a number of reasons. Partly because people don't have the time or businesses can't afford to ask people for the time to go to 8 classes of 2 hours or 2.5 hours long, and people haven't got the time mostly in their busy days to spend 45 minutes or an hour doing practices every day. So it had to be stripped down. And the wonderful thing was that Mark Williams and Danny Penman had written this self-help book, Mindfulness, a Practical Guide to Finding Peace in a Frantic World, that then became the framework of being able to take the ideas from mindfulness-based cognitive therapy into a shortened course. Now, it still needed to be taught in a way that worked for the workplace. And the workplace is a very different context to the context of therapy. People come with different expectations. They are they generally don't want to be identified as people that have problems with stress. So you've got to change the way in which the whole process, the whole practice is presented to the workplace, and it's got to be taught in a way that engages people in the workplace. And I used experience that I'd had in teaching and training in other contexts, particularly, I suppose, in teaching English as a foreign language, and in training in environmental work with the Environment Agency that I used to work for. So developed a new way of teaching this thing we could call mindfulness meditation. And it involved a lot of getting people to talk to each other, to understand each other. I came to the point of realizing that it was very much something that what was beneficial was very much something about the way people were talking to each other and the social process in the classroom. So I do want to challenge the kind of doctrine of the container of mindfulness as it is taught in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and mindfulness-based stress reduction, but recognize the important step that this has taken in our society to bring a contemplative practice into the mainstream. We have to respect that, but we must also, I believe, learn to find ways of adapting it to different social contexts that work for different contexts. Now there is, this movement has been going on the mindfulness movement has grown and it's expanded in many ways, and there are many different competing voices within it. At the heart of it, I believe, is this scientific approach to mindfulness, or the mindfulness format of the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and its predecessor, mindfulness-based stress reduction. And this is bringing the whole of the movement to a place of maturity, where it's beginning to have the knowledge and experience, where it's looking for something more. Because many of us, whoever we are, whether we are in a clinical context or in a context in the workplace or in a context that's interested in social change, are looking for something deeper than just fixing the problem that society has created for us all in terms of huge epidemics of stress. I think that they are very much related to overconsumption, social injustice, and the destruction of natural resources. I think they're all related. So that's the context that I'm trying to apply mindfulness. So can we reperceive mindfulness to give it a new function, to give it a new role that has more impact in the kinds of areas of concern that concern me, and I know concern many of you and many people today in the world. So let's look at the historical context for mindfulness. Now, the way we see mindfulness practice as coming from the Buddhist tradition, we look at the Buddhist tradition and it's a collection of remarkable teachings presented or given in conversations and talks by a man 2,500 years ago in northern India, a very different time, a very different culture. The prevailing concern in that culture was, would I have a better rebirth? Now, he, to escape this rebirth, this birth that I have in this world that I have. And so all of the practices of the contemporary culture were about performing rituals to gain a better rebirth. So he sold what he was talking about in terms of escaping rebirth or reincarnation, escaping cyclic existence and entering something that we don't really know very much about. He doesn't really talk very much about it, but it's described as, nirvana or nibbana. Now, he gave a number of instructions about how to perform, how to live a life that would get us to this place. And there were ethical instructions, and there were instructions about understanding the nature of things and how to develop our awareness and understanding of that. And central to that, but actually in terms of the actual texts or talks that the Buddha gave, texts on mindfulness are really quite a small collection of things. So the objective that the Buddha was talking about was escaping rebirth. This is clearly not relevant to us today, but we've found all sorts of meaningful things in the Buddha's texts that we've applied in modern society. Now, what happened was, by some series of conditions or historical conditions, a very forward-thinking monk, a leader monk in Burma, came up with a new way of teaching meditation that would make it accessible to the lay population during the colonial period, when the institutions of the state, of Burmese state, the royal court, and the institution of the Sangha, the educated elite of the Burmese culture was crumbling due to the influence of the colonial British power. Now, this monk, Ledi Sayadaw, came up with the idea that if he could teach a very quick and easy form of meditation to the lay population, he could get the lay population to become the guardians, to become the guardians of the identity of Burmese Buddhism, of the Burmese culture, Burmese nationality, and Buddhism, that were all fused. There was no understanding of the difference between these things. And that's how he created a new form of meditation that became insight meditation, that we may know of, that transmitted to the West. It was interesting to Westerners because it became a way of looking at our internal psychological process by observing it and learning from it to understand how we create the suffering that we experience in modern day Western society, which is a very different kind of suffering to the suffering that, because it's caused by different social conditions, by the suffering that's experienced by Burmese Buddhists in the early 20th century, and a very, perhaps quite a different kind of suffering that Buddha was talking about, but a very similar translation of similar ideas and principles into different contexts that produced a new form of meditation. And I must stress this, it's a new form of meditation based on traditional principles that Ledi Sayadaw created and then became adopted by Western Buddhists, taken from the East to the West, and eventually became a kind of self-analytical system that helped us escape the angst, the anguish, the stress and the suffering of living in modern Western society. And it's out of that it became something that was secularized, formulated, and then translated into psychological explanations in cognitive behaviorism and tested. Now, Barbara, I've been rattling on for a lot longer than I expected. How are we doing for time?
Perfect. 19 minutes, so we are 10 to like 20, 11:20 now. So what would you like, Mark?
Have I got a couple more minutes?
Yeah,
or
yeah, sure, please.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So really, what I've done is I've looked to try and find ways to explain what, I suppose in parallel, they're very similar to the original framework that the Buddha gave in terms of achieving the objective that was relevant in his time, which are in these three areas of the Eightfold Path of ethics, understanding, and the cultivation of mind states that are, balanced, or in broad terms, it's called concentration. We can call that meditation practice. And look at cognitive mindfulness as we understand it, and then look at what we could describe as, in modern terms, in our terms, in contemporary terms in society, as three realms of, or three domains of social, what I'm describing as social mindfulness. I should say I'm not the person that created the word social mindfulness, but I'm perhaps defining it for the first time like this. There's an individual sphere, an individual domain, which is what everybody here, I think, will be familiar with. There's a relational domain. Now, you'll all be aware of that intuitively if you lead a mindfulness class, because you're asking people to talk to each other. You're creating a social environment in which people feel safe enough to close their eyes and learn to look inside and develop their own capacity for developing calmness and clarity of mind. There's also, so that's the relational aspect. It's I'm listening to you and I'm listening to myself. Perhaps I'm describing my experience as we do in a mindfulness program, a standard mindfulness program, and listening to what's going on. And then there's the idea of the whole group. The whole group in a mindfulness course begins to create an identity for itself. And I think that identity is hugely powerful. So all I'm saying is, how do we, or what I'm saying, I'm trying to make those three aspects of mindfulness practice explicit. If you like, the individual aspect is, parallel to the concentration aspect of the Buddhist Eightfold Path. The relational aspect is very close to ethics in its implication. And the group identity, I think, has got a lot to do with the aspects of philosophical understanding or conceptual understanding and insight that makes up the Eightfold Path, because it's identity that we use to define things. It's what we use to define mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, what we use to define ourselves as mindfulness-based instructors or teachers. It's what traps us. And mindfulness, if it's anything as a practice, is learning to see the usefulness of those definitions, but their transient nature, and being able to think outside the box when the time is right. So I think that concludes my little introduction.
Wow. Thank you so much. I think you touched upon a lot. And the idea we discussed, Mark, is that now people go out into breakout rooms with 5 persons each group. And maybe could you describe what you would like them to do, Mark?
Can you remind me what we discussed?
Yeah. What we were thinking about is that they explore the question, mindfulness, what is it for? So please, in groups of 5 persons, maybe in a way of mindfully inquiring the question, mindfulness, what is it for? And then please nominate one representative of your group, because if we come back in the plenary session, we'll ask one person per group to write down some questions or remarks that came up during your dialogue together. So, Mark, probably you also read most of them. There are coming in some more comments, and some are in Dutch. So please forgive me if I don't, how can I say that clearly? Well, what I take out of the most of the comments is like it's about starting within yourself with cultivating calm, clarity, and then from that perspective bring it into the world and look with different eyes probably. And so that we can relate more skillfully to life as it is presenting itself. So excuse me everybody if I didn't put it how you meant it, but that's what I get out of it. So Mark, please, could you reflect on what you read?
Well, I think there's a key theme here, and I'd just like to sort of highlight one or two other things that I've quickly seen. Sadly, I'm not very good at reading Dutch, so you'll have to translate those comments for me. I think there's one phrase here from Yoka, is that right? To recognize our relational patterns and be able to see if it is wholesome or not, and then act according to wholesomeness. This is key, but the question I'd ask is, which comes first as a human being? Is it our capacity to observe our inner process, build intention or build awareness, and then intention to change? Is this an isolated thing, or does this start from a social context? My view is that while there is a great deal that we can learn from practicing mindfulness with this framing of understanding of the individual mind, and I wouldn't deny its critical importance, but this can change the way we interact individually to understand these things. But we cannot do this without good sense of relational understandings of being a human being in a social context to start with. So we have to create, in actual fact, to create the capacity for individuals to develop this autonomy, this freedom in themselves, this self-awareness, self-knowledge, and the capacity to choose to follow certain patterns and not others, a kind of internal compass of ethics that is based on understanding how we relate to each other and how those feelings arise in us, depending on how we relate to people in different ways, or communicate with people in ways, or interact with people in different ways. So there's this, I'm sorry, I'm rambling on a little bit. There's this internal autonomy that we can build. But in the end, that if we become skilled in that, we can have an impact on others around us positively through positive relationships and positive communication. Now then, this has all sorts of benefits, but is this going to solve the problem of society today? Now, perhaps it would, if we could get a huge proportion of the Western world to get to this place quickly. Now, perhaps it might be 20 or 30%. It's shown that, I mean, in experiments, that you need 25% of a group that actively wants to change the way in which the group behaves and thinks to get the group behavior to change. So we might say that it possibly would need 25% of the population to get to that place of understanding through practice to impact the way in which the whole economy and society works, to create perhaps a value-based economy, a value-based society, or where all actions were based on creating a humane humanness that would, and our whole lives, our whole society would be based on being able to serve the greater good of all of us. So I think we need to tell a different story. I think we need to create an approach to teaching and describing mindfulness, which I'm using this word social mindfulness to stress the social aspect of what it is to be a human being, to point out that what's important in achieving change is bringing a network of collected, like-minded individuals together that can then act in a way that is engaged. Interestingly, of course, Thich Nhat Hanh experimented with this in Vietnam and brought it to the West and subtly changed aspects of the ideas of Buddhism that had been translated from Asian cultures into the West to make it a social process. Really what I'm saying is that we need to find a contemporary secular framework for explaining that we need to bring those values into a group that is able to act consciously to change collective behavior to make a more humanely human society and a more sustainable economy. That's my response.
Wow. Let me ask you, Mark, because if I understand you well, you say, well, it's maybe not about making the shift from individual mindfulness to social mindfulness, but it is both.
Yeah.
Is this what you are saying? So, and we have to know what we are doing.
Yeah. I think that's very much so. It's actually recognizing that we are not separate individuals, but we have still some individuality, some ability to gain understanding and act skillfully to create a better conditions for ourselves and others. Now, it's a complicated thing to explain. In a way, it's just recognizing, developing, placing mindfulness in a context that is saying, this is going to help us work together to build a better world. So how do we work together? How does mindfulness then help us work together to build a better world? Because individually, we are disempowered. Or we can have a small influence in our own lives or in the relationships we have. But to change collective behavior, we must take on a more activist role. And the effective activist is someone that brings a group of people together or finds a group of people in a community or in an organization and changes the culture that is defined by that community and that organization. And the implication is that we need 25% of people in any organization or community, a group that is going to say, we want to change the way things are here actively to make that change happen. Now, I don't think you're going to get everybody, 25% of an organization to become meditation adepts to do that. So I think we have to look at how we see ourselves as mindfulness instructors or mindfulness teachers to be able to bring together a dynamic that has a power of a group, in fact, a group mind that can solve problems, that reflects perhaps an external expression of how we've learned through mindfulness practice and study, perhaps in different contemplative traditions, to become autonomous in ourselves and choose to change in ways that we think are more humane or kind and sustainable for our own selves into a collective sense of direction that can have real effective change to deal with the problems that we face today. And this is a different context that has historically been the case for contemplatives. It is a context that if we don't do this, the chances, if we don't collectively do this, one way or another, whether it's mindfulness practitioners that have an input into this or not, the future is not looking good for our children and our grandchildren. That is a different context to contemplative practice than perhaps has ever been the case.
So I'm looking to, thank you, Mark. I'm looking to the comments, and I think a lot of the comments and questions go about this theme, that in a way, if we, with mindfulness trainer, become more aware and we develop skills to relate more skillfully to suffering, to life, that could be the starting point also for social change. And maybe it's beautiful, because what came up with me is that what I was taught, that the starting point of the Buddha was, how do we live together skillfully? So of course this idea comes up in with your story, and also if you talk about the 3 branches where social mindfulness is one of, these are also the 3 branches of the Eightfold Path. So the efforts, the right efforts, the calm, and let me see what we did. We had the effort, the concentration, and mindfulness of the samadhi, but we also had, where did I put it? The concentration, the calm you mentioned, the ethics you mentioned, and the understanding. So,
yeah. Well, broadly speaking, it's the understanding, it's the ethics, and the concentration, which we normally translate as meditation. Well, we often do translate as meditation. So if you like, that's the body work. That's the neurological body work that is processing the insight, or the understanding, and the emotions of, or the positive affect of kindness. Mm-hmm. And then we process that mental and emotional processing in the body so that it becomes embodied. You know, the impact of our destructive emotions, or emotions that cause a belief that we are separate from others and we must compete with others, or others are our enemies. So we're deconstructing the belief that we are a separate individual under threat, and that things are objects, and we are, you know, the classic left brain framing of reality that we can manipulate in order to protect ourselves or get what we want. And the emotions of fear or threat that feed those ways of thinking. So we are replacing those emotions of fear or threat with practicing or developing kindness. And this is at the one side of the coin of understanding that the idea that we are a separate individual under threat, and that we are disconnected from, and we are separate to others, and our interests are separate, is also a transient illusion that's useful at certain times to plan and do things. When we conceptually understand that, and we train the emotional experience to be kind with an intention behind it, we then practice this to settle the mind and allow the body to then process the traumatic imprints of the strong emotions of threat that are supported by the ideas that say that we are an individual under threat and we have enemies. So that's the individual process. It's just a question of how do we turn that individual process into a collective process that results in change. It results in a change in the way society works, and the change in the way we distribute resources, a change in the way we consume resources.
Yeah, there is a comment of Ferry de Wit that I think it's written in Dutch, so I'll try to translate. He says something like that he experiences the mindfulness community as an inner circle, and that he says, isn't it isn't, and please, Ferry, if I put it, I don't put it right, help me out. He says something like, isn't it necessary that we become more, I think, inclusive and diverse, and to speak another language, so that we really integrate mindfulness into society. So please, Ferry, comment if this is what you said. Let me see. Something like that. Thank you. So do we need, as a mindfulness society, to become more inclusive, to become more diverse? And how can we do that? How can we make it more social, actually?
Yeah, this is a really key point. It doesn't necessarily specifically relate to one of the key problems that we have that are beginning to be more recognized in amongst mindfulness teachers, the mindfulness community, if you like, that it's largely based, it's largely focused. The main members of this group are white, middle class, well-educated people, and that there are a very small representation of people from less privileged backgrounds or different ethnic groups. That this is critical, but at the root of this problem, my view is that mindfulness, as we have defined it or believe it to be, the box that it contains, is something that we have created as Northern European colonial view of the world, which at its core has an idea of a mechanical universe that we can manipulate, that can be objectified, and that each one of us is an individual whose responsibility it is to, through effort, improve our lot. So it's a worldview that is colonialist and destroys community, creates loneliness and the mental health problems we face. Now, we've discovered what has emerged from colonial Burma is a system that we've adopted as a self-help tool. Now, why would traditional communities, whether they be less mobile working class communities in Northern Europe or the USA or wherever, or African American communities or African communities that have been fighting to maintain their communities, want to adopt a self-help system that's designed to ameliorate the stress that has been created by the colonial system that has and perhaps economic system that has destroyed their communities? What good do they see in this? So if we want to create a more collective, a more inclusive approach, we have to, I think, start by understanding that the problem is in the construction of the understanding of the separate individual that we are applying mindfulness to solve the individual's problem. We have to find a narrative that talks about it being something that we can help communities to come together. And to do that, we must find a language that works for that community. And the language is going to be more social because, the reason why, if you like, as Western Europeans, many of us have become disillusioned with institutions of religion. And we've found this meaningful practice, contemplative practice, that doesn't ram sort of institutional religion down our throats. But institutional religion is the framework that we have turned religion into in, I guess, post-Roman Empire, nation-building processes that have resulted in colonialism across the world. It's what underpins religion in a traditional society, and what underpinned Christianity before, early Christianity, was community. And what contemporary ethnic minority Christians live by is the community that comes together to sing together in the church. How do we bring that quality to draw community into a social practice, a social community that is supported through mindfulness, through all of the qualities that, for the sake of argument, an African American Christian gains when they go to church on Sunday. Until we do that, we'll always be a little group of white middle class Northern Europeans, or Americans or Australians or whatever.
Wow, I think that really fits to the comments about that we have to develop our language so that we can adapt our language to more social context. And somebody is talking about branding mindfulness differently. That this is more the commercial language used. But so is it an idea, Mark, that we move into the 5 minutes, 10 minutes breakout rooms to discuss on, okay, we listened to your talk, and I think, well, let me speak for myself, this really shuffles the ground under our feet as mindfulness trainers who teaches MBSR and MBCT. So is it an idea that we discuss now, what do we need to grow in our practice here? So
yeah.
So the question
and this is like, what do we do? So we can tell a story, but the story has to be something to do with how do we do it? That's the question.
Yeah. Yeah. So please, Mark, reformulate it again. What would you like people to reflect on in the breakout rooms now?
Well, I mean, the question that you've asked is very much describes it. I was just pointing out that this is a two-stage shift to create new language, but that new language has to be something to do with doing things differently too. So it's, what could the language be? Then how do we teach it? And what is the social impact? What are we trying to do? How do we get other people to come together to make a better society, a more humane society, a more just society, a more sustainable society? Beautiful
question. Wow, in 5 or 10 minutes. Well, go for it. Yeah, that's
I'm all ears looking for answers.
So that's really short, but maybe it's really nice to just come together and see what pops up in 5 or 10 minutes, and then we come back and you have all the opportunity to ask questions to Mark. So I read about, are the problems not too complex to solve it with mindfulness? We have to combine it with political movements. So not starting extra activities, but opening up our backstage. And there is a question, do you have some examples of being an activist in the way you are proposing? So make it very practical. So it's also about adapting the language again. Being curious so we can open up to what is happening. Common humanity is coming up in different ways. Is it okay to become a religion? That's also a very interesting question. And the other part is, do we want to become like a kind of preachers? And know the pain and suffering of the population you want to reach. So, Mark, if you see all these comments, what comes up in your head?
Well, lots of really big questions. And as always, the task is, I think for all of us, as much as me here on the spot, is to condense something that has a simplicity to give us a direction, to do something that satisfies what we're trying to bring together. I think we need to have an idea about what we're trying to achieve, and for me, this is clearly a more just and sustainable society. There's one question that was, do you have an example? Well, one example that I'd like to offer you is the Black Panthers. They were a political movement that was involved with doing what they could, whatever they could do to explore, whatever they could do to in social justice for African Americans. But the success of that movement was based as much on its desire for social justice, leaders that could present that, as it was their work in the deprived communities, feeding people, giving people money where they needed it. Now, another question is, do we turn this into a religion? Now, what is religion? What has it done? How does it work? How did it become powerful? Again, it's about community. You know, what do you see? You see in the UK, you see what do you call them? You know, street pastors from Christian churches walking around in the middle of the night, helping people that are drunk. Now, what do we see today in terms of, I mean, hope things are changing. We've had a right-wing backlash across society. And the right-wing backlash comes out of fear and anger and the building of those emotions that divide society and look for an enemy. And it has thrown away the arguments of justice and fairness that the liberal left have been talking about and talking about and talking about. If we want to bring those values into reality, we have to build a collective, a group of people, maybe 2 or 3, to echo something that the founder of Christianity mentioned, who will go out and help people to do something differently, to build a movement. That's a simple answer. How does mindfulness and social action become something that we can come together as a collective to enact in a real way in society, to command political force? We can do this in companies. We can do this in communities. It doesn't really matter where we do this. We've just got to find the right way of speaking about these things that makes people buy into them and work together for a common goal that is the common good.
Mm. We just discussed, Mark. I talked about I said that I would say it in Dutch, so you know where I'm going to talk about. Ik had het met Mark erover dat iets wat mij altijd heeft geraakt vanuit de boeddhistische leer is dat de Boeddha mindfulness ook wel vergeleken met een kijkinstrument waarmee je in een wond kan kijken om te kijken wat de wond nodig heeft. En ik vroeg me af, kunnen wij met mindfulness niet dat trainen, waarbij we niet alleen in de wond naar onszelf kijken, maar ook natuurlijk in relaties, maar ook in de sociale context. En in hoeverre kan dat ons helpen om vervolgens de juiste actie te nemen. So, Mark, I just spoke out loud. The question is can we use the capability of looking into a wound, what is needed? This can be done on personal level, but also on the level of interpersonal and also on the social level. And could this not be the starting point of going into right action, as you just said?
So I totally agree. Now, this is, if you like, perhaps the agenda that you could use to build a program that that was designed for some kind of action learning process to come up with action to solve the problem that is understood by the looking into the wound. So, but this would mean reframing. I mean, I'm not sure, maybe you could do it with mindfulness-based stress reduction. I don't see why not. I don't see why you couldn't, you'd have to have the courage to go, right, we're going to chop this up and start again. And that's effectively what I've done with the course that I've developed. But trying to honor the structure of what went before to maintain its provenance. Now, there's only one reason for doing that, to maintain its provenance, and that is to inherit the word mindfulness in a way that is meaningful in society, to test it as an intervention. Now, it doesn't matter how you use it, but you've got to find a way of making it accessible. Now, it depends who you are and what your job is and how you can do that. Maybe you are a community worker and you can start to apply it in this way and design something. Maybe you are a well-being practitioner or a coach and you can start to build this into a structure. Maybe you're a group of people that want to do this and build something that you can then brand as mindfulness action learning for social change. I don't know. There are all sorts of possibilities, but you have to come together, or you have to build, you have to have a go at it. And what does that involve as a program? But to build influence, I think we need to come together to do something. Now, I've done it as best I can in doing something in organizations, explicitly trying to put all of this into words that people go, oh yes, we need to do that.
Wow, thank you so much, Mark. There's a lot of engagement going on in the chat room. I see people talking to each other about, can we come together and discuss this and make plans and see how we can do this? There are also questions, how can we reach people of other religions like Muslims? And also what comes up a lot isn't the starting point common humanity, that in the beginning we don't differ so much from each other, and if we recognize that, then maybe we can reach out to each other. And also, as one of the representatives of the VMBN, of course the question comes up, you said something about it, you can also integrate this maybe into your MBSR or MPCT. So can you say something about how you think we should relate to these programs that, of course, are evidence-based, are developed skillfully? And so, because what happens in me is that I really discuss how do we want to fix ourselves to the programs, and is this skillful to do? And because in our association we are now also looking at other mindfulness-based programs. So, but these are still the programs. So there's also always fixating going on, and of course we do this also to be careful with the quality, to be careful with the integrity of the trainers, of the teachers. So could you say something about that?
Okay, just from an abstract, in a very sort of overview, institutions need to maintain themselves to have influence. But so long as the institution serves only the institution, it will die. So it's the maintenance of the institution. The same is with a human being. So long as we are individuals serving ourselves, we will end up becoming redundant to society. Now, what evolution does is it has this self-sustaining system of the individual or the organization or the community, but it is in constant tension with changing conditions and adapting to it. It can't, if it just collapses, it can't sustain it. You know, the internal system fails. The internal system has to be maintained and adapt to the changing conditions. So that's the broad question. Now, the specifics are have to come out of the choices you make. Now, the choice I made was to go against the stream and do something that is actually challenging the establishment of mindfulness-based institutions by going out there and redesigning a program and saying that it was evolved from MBCT, which it was, but saying that I was including learnings that I'd gained in trying to teach the Frantic World course, a shortened version, in the workplace, and then rejigging, slightly restructuring the course so I still felt it was legitimate to describe it as mindfulness-based. You know, we called it mindfulness-based organizational education. So it had we were going to think of calling it social, but because we were trying to make money out of it, we called it organizational. And education, rather to change the shift from it being something that was all about a stress on the practice to something that it was all about education to do something explicitly differently. Now, that was just what I did. And then I had this wonderful opportunity. I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity to be asked to design this program, and funding, and a hospital that was willing to set up a trial, and we could do a study, and then we got the outcomes published. Now, that is a path you can take, but I can tell you it is not going to be easy to get in. You know, there are not many interventions that are tested in trials in the workplace that are then publishable. So, but you're having to ask the same questions. What is it that I can do that can gain traction and interest? Now, you as a group have an institutional power, and I'd suggest that you need to discuss amongst yourselves a collective agreement, maybe a subgroup that comes to a consensus about that is interested in designing something that has the impacts that you want it to have. In this context, we're talking about, you know, making a more humane society and a more sustainable society, a more just society. how do you start from scratch? You've got the power of your institution behind you.
Mm.
And you could say, right, we're taking our learnings as experienced practitioners to build something that is specifically for these ends. Now, I think you've probably done this in lots of ways, and lots of people do it in lots of ways, but I'm saying, why don't you do it explicitly? Why don't you just make a noise about it? Now, maybe you can attract funding to make this something that gives you power as an institution to promote it. I don't know. You know, you have to think about this strategically. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I see in the chat room that a lot of ideas come up to meet each other about this theme again, and maybe that the VMBN can facilitate such meetings. So we're gonna explore those possibilities. And so, Mark, if you could give us one question that we have to take with us.
One more.
One or the same question.
Or another one.
Yeah, or another one. What question do we have to take by heart you think we have to take in our hearts the coming time?
Well, the question, overarching question that I'm asking, and I've asked myself, is how can I have an impact to make a better world, a world in which I can have confidence, or have some that my children and my grandchildren are going to live full and happy lives? How can I do that? How can I have some impact on that? That's the question that I ask myself.
Beautiful. I don't know if it resonates with everybody, but it does resonate in my heart. So it's about time, and maybe just let us look around to the people that are still here, and if you have one question you think I really want to ask to Mark now, please put it in the chat box. We can take one more question. So there are no more questions coming up, I think. So, Mark, may I thank you deeply on behalf of our community, and I think it was such an inspiring talk you gave us. Before I forget, somebody is reminding me, can you put in the chat box, Mark, the name of your book and of the program? So Marcus, and we'll also share it in our newsletter. So
that's I'll also, if you like, just give you my LinkedIn profile, and you're welcome to connect with me. I've given you the my workplace website, and you can, there's a little bit of brief description about the course and the book, and of course do come back. I'm happy to have a discussion about that sometime. Maybe if there's a group of people that would be interested in finding out more, I can talk through that.
Wow.
Give a talk about that if you're interested in that. I mean, I broadly speaking, I'd like to say that my intention is to create a model rather than a final product. But you have to have it, from my point of view, what this course is a proof of case that creates a holistic model of, one could call it, the group mind and how we create social agency, individual and social agency. That could be, that could be one way of putting it. That's the intention. It's to create a holistic model of agency.
That sounds very interesting. Yeah.
And it has to be, then you have to put it into a format that then can be, that can become the proof of the theory, which is exactly what mindfulness-based cognitive therapy did. And I'm coming back to Zoom to share my LinkedIn profile. So that should give you enough of a clue of pointers of how to track me down.
So no more rest in your life from now on.
I'm also working with 2 consultancies and training bodies. You'll see links to those in my LinkedIn profile. One's an organizational development consultancy, and one it comes from the other end, if you like, which provides well-being, holistic well-being. When an organization is looking for holistic well-being, they will come to this consultancy. When they're looking for organizational development, they'll come to, it's Talik and Co. And when they're looking for well-being, they come to 7 Futures. So I've got a foot in both camps.
Wow. Well, it's coming to an end because we are already 12:05. So thank you for the inspiring talk, and thank you for everybody joining and being so engaged, and also have patience with my English. So thank you very much, and take good care of yourself and of the people around you and of the world.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, BMBN people. Thank you all for everyone's interest. It's wonderful to be here.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.